Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Iván Rodriguez, and we'll be starting the introduction to clinical trials for community. I am part of Egality Sciences as my co-founder.
Hello, my name is Tatiana Puga.
And we are here today to discuss anything that you have related in history, education, and knowledge about clinical trials. So we can continue. And this is sponsored by Council Member Letitia Plummer and her team. Thank you so much for having us today. So what we're going to discuss today are the definitions of clinical research and the role in medicine development. We want to understand how medications are developed and recognize the history of clinical research. But what does this mean for you, the community member? So we can go ahead and continue.
Why are clinical trials important? Your community has decided to take part in a clinical research study. And so essentially what we're here to do is make sure that we can help you understand the information that's going to be presented to you so that you can make an informed decision about your willingness to participate in the trial opportunities that are presented.
So we'll start off with headlines about medicine. So all of these cutouts to the right are basically headlines where medications have been approved and how this has helped community. Basically, these headlines would not be possible if we did not have clinical trials behind it. And when I'm talking about years, I'm talking about 10 to 15 years, and sometimes even longer for phase 4 studies. So all of these, and when you buy a medication at CVS or any pharmacy that you have, when you open up and you're given a medication, you're usually given a box, a packet, and you can open that up and there's a little tiny package insert. And what happens is within that package insert, you can open it up and it should have all the information that has in the past taken part with clinical trials. So this is important because not many people open this up. People usually toss it. And what we want is for people to understand that that information is within your medication packet. And you can always feel free to ask your healthcare provider about that.
So what is clinical research? Clinical research is essentially scientific study that involves people. So it is us looking at how different medical devices, medical drugs, interventions, therapies, how they actually react when you put them into a human body. People are often requested to participate in studies. When you are designing a trial, you're looking for a certain population that relates to the disease state that you're trying to take care of. And so all clinical trials are volunteer only. So our participants are people who have decided to dedicate their time for this purpose to help investigate the actions of this drug or device in this population. So research versus standard of care. So what does that mean exactly? These are terms that you'll hear pretty frequently when you are actually communicating about studies. Research, standard of care. Standard of care is essentially what are the established norms for how to handle a certain disease state or a condition. These are things that have been established as best practice, usually by societies that are focused on a specific population or disease state. And so this takes years for them to establish. It involves the course of research and actually to get there to the point of determining what is standard of care. But standard of care is essentially an agreed upon norm of how this situation should be handled. Research, however, is where you are looking to see like what could we do differently and what does that end up creating. So research studies are used to find newer, better treatments. You may have a certain treatment that has been the standard of care for a period of time, but then a new therapy is released, a new drug, a new device, a new treatment plan comes out that has been identified to perhaps provide greater benefit to patients than the standard of care. So most of the time in research, what we're doing is we are comparing something new to the standard of care, because we always want to make sure we're never going backwards. So the standard of care is essentially our baseline. That's the point where we're saying this is normal, this is what we know is the best way to move forward. So once we start to go into research, we're saying, is there a better way to handle this population? Should our standard of care be elevated? Because now we are more aware of more information and more knowledgeable and are seeing through the research that these opportunities may, or new therapies, drugs, devices, may be better than the standard of care, and perhaps it needs to be altered.
So in a recap, basically standard of care focuses on treating people when the right time, when they need it. And research is done to help answer questions for the future care. So one thing to note is that participating in clinical trials is 100% always voluntary. People volunteer for a variety of reasons. You may want to volunteer because you want to help others. You may want to volunteer because you're interested in a new treatment for the disease that you have, or they may want to try this as an option of care because maybe they've already taken medication and that medication is not working as best as it can. So you may want to participate for these reasons. There are two different types of clinical studies. That is observational or interventional. In that case, observational studies observe people over time, and that they don't typically focus on the way you take a medication. It's just your normal life. So they usually do quality assessments. They ask you how you feel. They ask you about everything that you're doing on the day-to-day. And interventional studies test something new, either a medication, a device. And basically what interventional studies do is it's possible, just something to know, it's definitely possible for a voluntary participant to receive placebo during interventional studies.
So what is a placebo? A placebo is essentially an inactive substitute for what the real product is. So in a study, whenever you're doing a comparative trial, so let's say you want to know how medication A, which is our standard of care, performs as compared to medication B, which is the new drug that's coming out. This is what we would consider an interventional study, right? So when you're moving through some of these aspects, you may want to put in a group that's called a placebo group. The purpose of a placebo group is basically to make sure that the effects you're actually seeing in a clinical study from the people that are on the medication are genuinely because of the medication and are not being influenced by knowledge that you are receiving something that may be creating a benefit. So this is to say, let's give an example. Let's say that you always have regular headaches all the time. And so you're given this regular medication that you take all the time. It doesn't work. You get into a study. Now you know that you might be receiving a new drug that might give you a better benefit. It is very possible for people to start to believe and feel that they are feeling better or feeling a difference, even if they are not actually receiving a drug that is doing something to them, because you're influenced by what is happening to you. So that is the purpose of a placebo, is essentially to make sure that we're not catching information in a study that is being created because somebody feels that they may be feeling a reaction to something versus the group that is actually receiving that therapy and what their reactions are.
So something I'd like to add is that even when people in an interventional study when people receive placebo, physicians are not aware of what is assigned to you. Usually the sugar pill or the placebo looks exactly like the real medication in order to make sure that everyone's given appropriate, the appropriate amount of people in groups are given the same thing. And if there is ever a time that safety is an issue, that blind that is created to the physician can be broken in efforts to oversee your safety.
So screening, when you think about going through a clinical study, there are different phases to actually getting into the study. The first part of that is what's called screening. So screening is a process of checking if someone can join a clinical trial. It basically makes sure that the people you're bringing in are going to have the conditions that you're looking for, that they will not have certain things that we know may impact the results of the study. So there's your inclusion criteria, which is a list of things that the patients must meet. And then you also have what's called exclusion criteria, which is a list of things that if the patient has any of these certain criteria, they cannot be included in the study. Exclusion criteria is helpful because a lot of times it's used to make sure you're not bringing in any factors that may make it hard to understand the results of a study. So you might exclude a certain group of patients or people because their natural state might present similar to something that you're trying to test, and that could throw out the results a bit. So screening is a process of really going through. They usually will look at your medical history. There's often physical exams done. They're likely to do blood work because they're usually trying to see if you have certain lab readings that may be required for inclusion in the study. And it also basically helps to make sure that the participants in the study are staying safe by weeding out the group that might have negative responses to their participation in the study.
So we're going to go ahead and cover phases of research. These interventional studies are typical when you do have a new medication. So basically phase 1 is first time in human. They usually last only a couple of months. They typically include a very small amount of people, usually from 20 to max about 100 people. And it's usually done in very few clinics. So it'll be done, I've seen max 5 clinics throughout the country. But typically what the purpose would be is, first and foremost, is it safe? Second, how does the medication process through your body? And what are the side effects?
Additionally, phase 1 study is often done, it's done in healthy humans most typically.
Yes, and I will say that in oncology studies, because our community is focused a little bit more on cancer research, phase 1 studies in cancer research are only done in cancer patients because of the toxicity of the medications.
So phase 2 studies are essentially what you're going to do next after you've gone through phase 1. So you've completed phase 1, you've made sure that the drug is safe, can be processed through the body without any severe impacts. And so now you're moving on to actually looking at how does this work in a longer term. So we've got, the studies usually take months to 2 years. We're looking at larger samples of subjects. So 100 plus people can be included in this. And so now we're always building on top of where we begin. So we always start with safety, that's phase 1. Every phase of research that you do will always look at safety. So when we go to phase 2, we're still looking at safety, but we're also saying how well is it working and how much should we take it. This is where you'll start to see them introduce different doses of the medication so that they're able to see if there is one that perhaps produces the more optimal results in different patients.
Phase 3 is the largest of the interventional before medication is reviewed by the FDA. So phase 3 can last from 1 to 4 years. It typically includes 300 through to about 3,000 patients, sometimes even more, depending on the therapeutic area or disease. And as Tatiana mentioned, always focused on safety first, but then we continue to see how well it's working on many different thousands of patients, and does the benefit outweigh the risk? So we're always questioning and making sure that this is the best for patients to take.
And as they move through the phases, they start to refine more and more around the dosing. So you might be wondering what's the difference between 2 and 3? And 2, maybe they started with 6 different doses that they wanted to test. So now they've whittled down from that 6, and in this new one, they're really zeroing in on what is the most appropriate dosage for treating whatever condition they're trying to address.
And then we have the FDA submission, review, and approval stage. So this is where, after they've done all the research, they submit an application. They have that application reviewed, and if they're able to either review it, approve it, review it, have questions, and have researchers answer those questions, then get it approved, a conditional approval, or they can decline it and say, this is why it was declined. After it's approved, though, it is available to the general public for use. And then we still have more research to go through.
After that, I think we're done, but we're not. We move on to phase 4 research. So phase 4 research is post-market research. These studies are usually more spread out. They're usually in larger numbers of patients. So we're looking at 1 to 4 years. We're looking at several thousand patients. As we noted, always building on safety. So is it still safe? Are there new things, new signals that we're starting to see now that we're seeing the drug or device being used in larger populations? Are there any rare side effects that we can pick up in these earlier studies? Because now it's more widespread, you can start to see the way it can react in different people. And then you start looking at things like cost effectiveness, comparison to other drugs. These are these post-market studies that you'll see starting to show up. And the whole idea behind this is also looking at, are there other uses? You know, once you've got a drug on the market, you start to recognize like maybe it might help this group as well. And so then you'll do a study to look at that drug in that group, and that's how you discover that there's new uses and new indications for medications and devices.
So this is a short video provided to us by Genentech, and this is basically summarizing what Tatiana and I have covered in the last few slides. So we want to cover why community members will typically worry about joining clinical trials. I think this is an important piece and we need to cover this. Some community members are very familiar with the Tuskegee study, but there are many other studies, unfortunately, in the very recent past that have occurred where many underserved communities have been taken advantage of. So these are some of those studies that have taken place and that were then basically there were laws put in place, which I will cover in the next few slides because of these studies. So I welcome everyone to take a look. I do have information on these studies. After this presentation is over, if you're interested in learning more, I can certainly provide information to you about these studies. But I wanted to outline this because this is very real. This affects all our communities, and we do need to be aware of historic atrocities that have happened and why people are worried. So again, this is a short list, but it's still a list of studies that have taken advantage of people in the past. But again, as I mentioned to you, every one of those studies helped create laws to keep people safe. So these are, we do have a couple of other slides, but these are some of the things that took place to protect. For example, we have the establishment of the National Institute of Health, making sure that there's protection of human subjects. And that was only in NIH. But as we go down through fast forwarding on time, there are different laws that have taken place. For example, in 1962, then you have the FDA or Congress passing amendments, and they become part of the federal registry. So basically, these are now a law, and now we're required to make sure that we protect patients all the time. And this is a continuation. So it just continues to go on, as you can see in 1980, 1981. You continue to see that there's protections for patients and so on. I think there's a video attached to this, but I will summarize it because the video may not, it's a little lengthy and we only need a snippet. But I'll cover what an institutional review board is, because this is very important, because this is basically the key that protects all community. So all research has to go through an institutional review board, and the minimum amount of board members are 5. One always has to be a community member. They do not have to have an MD or a PhD or be a physician. They just have to have their, they have to be in community and they have to look after community. So non-scientific. But essentially, this is meant for there to be always somebody at the table that's having that information out there. And also, so you also have legal, you have a physician, you can have a nurse, but all in that, every single study goes through that. And within the informed consent that you receive to participate, there is a section there where patients themselves can report and ask questions of the institutional review board while they're going through studies.
The IRB also helps to ensure that the studies that are being put forward are not going to take advantage of people in any particular way. A way that people can be taken advantage of is, for example, they could offer a ridiculously high reimbursement for participation to pull people into a study. Kind of playing on the fact that people might need that money more than they will look out for if that study is a good choice for them. So these are some tactics that probably have been used in the past in some of those atrocities that we've identified. And so the review board oversees those aspects of it. They make sure that the informed consent document that every subject must review and sign before they can participate in the study is being truthful, that it is in a level of reading that most people will be able to understand, that it contains all of the information about the risks, about the potential benefits, how the study is going to be conducted, how long it will last, how many people will participate. Literally every aspect of that trial is explained in the informed consent document to make sure that you as a participant are fully informed of what it is that you are signing up for and giving you the opportunity to decide. And then you sign that document, as does the staff, and that's what makes it official that you choose to participate. You can always choose to stop participating at any time. That is another statement that is always captured in the informed consent. You can always stop participation without any loss of benefits you would have been otherwise entitled.
So what happens when people don't participate in research and when they're not represented? I think this is a very good journal. It came out in December of 2020 at the height of COVID. And this basically showed that because there weren't enough participants of melanated skin in pulse oximeters, they were not as accurate on African American and Hispanic patients with darker skin. And so patients were being sent home, pulse oximeters were not accurate. So clinicians were doing the best they could to assess a patient, but the lack of representation showed that they weren't able to make a good judgment call because they were relying on a device that was not representative of everyone that was using it. So I think this is also a very good journal, and I have access to it. I can share it with the community if they're interested. But this is a key example of why we should try to participate in research when you're able to.
So how are researchers working to make sure everyone has access? As we talked about already, informed consent is a very important aspect of every clinical study that will happen. What we're making sure is happening is that they can be presented in other languages. So as long as a study site has people who are able to speak that language or have established a method to be able to help with translations and communicating with patients, they're able to provide the informed consent document in the various languages that they can support. That's important because a lot of people end up going into a study, and if you are unfamiliar with the language in that document, you may not recognize all of the things that you are agreeing to or what some of the words mean. And because of the situation that you're in, you may not feel comfortable asking questions, even though they are supposed to make you comfortable to fill it. We all know that there is a hesitancy there. And so by making sure that the informed consent documents can be provided in the language of these native speakers, that is one way that we're trying to make sure that access can be granted to a broader population. There are also opportunities and studies to be reimbursed for your participation, for your time and effort to make it to visits. Some studies do pay for mileage, for childcare. They may coordinate events like that. Some sites may have evening and weekend hours. There's also the use of mobile units to help make getting to and completing the study visits more accessible to different populations. And then sometimes they'll even cover like transportation costs, like Uber, Lyft, bus passes, different things like that. So a lot of times, if it's not presented to you right up front and you are in a situation where there's a study that you're interested in participating in, and one of these limitations might be in front of you for your participation, you should definitely ask if they have some way of being able to support that. You'll be able to see in the informed consent document, definitely it should be outlined if that is already set up for the study, but it also doesn't hurt to ask because you never know what people might be willing to help you do. Okay, so participants' rights. So also, what should you guys get as participants in a study? These are very important aspects because if you don't know, you won't ask. If you don't ask, you won't get. So you should be able to ask for copies of your test results. Remember, we talked about screening, that a lot of times they might be looking for certain lab signals. And so they'll do blood work on you. They will do your, maybe there's a fasting labs in there, maybe they're looking at your lipid panel, whatever that may be. But you should be able to ask for copies of that. So now you've got copies of these labs that were done on you. You can definitely request that, and then you can share that with your own care physician or keep it as your own records. You should definitely get a signed copy of the informed consent, signed by both you and the person at the site who went through the consent with you. This is your contract essentially with the site for participating in the study. You should definitely have that. It's something that you can refer back to later while you're participating in the study if you have any questions. And as Yvonne pointed out, there's even sections in there that tell you how to report any issues or reach out if you've been hurt from your participation, or even if you just have questions about the study itself. There is contact information in there as well. And then compensation for time travel if available. These are things that will be outlined in the consent form, but also, as we said, they're worth asking for as well while you're there. So know your rights and definitely make sure you ask for these things.
So how can you help someone find a study? So you have clinicaltrials.gov is a large online list of studies throughout the country, actually globally, but you can always narrow in. It's run by the National Library of Medicine. So they keep this updated, just wanting to let you know, everyone's responsible, whoever's running the trial is responsible for putting it up and keeping it updated as the trial goes along. So you're also making sure that you're making sure the study is safe, scientific, accurate, but clinicaltrials.gov is the place to go if you want to find any trial with any disease state. So this is basically what it looks like. You can start looking and put a condition, a disease. Maybe you know it as something else. You can look at another term. So you can. And this is basically the focus of the search. You can look again for other terms. You can look for maybe a treatment if you're looking for a specific treatment that you've read up on, or a location. The more things you add on here, the more specific you're going to get. But sometimes you want to look at all studies. They also have the status of whether it's complete, whether it's recruiting. Maybe it's not open to recruitment yet, and you see that it's up and coming and you see it's here in Houston, so you want to find where that is, you can look at that as well. And they usually put, the information is there months before it's gonna start, so you'll see that information. These are some tips that you can use when you're looking at clinicaltrials.gov. You want to use special words like and or. This can actually get you better results. You can do location-based results. If I know people that look for research, if they're looking for a specific treatment and, can travel, have family somewhere else, you can look at those areas. Share the location, city, state, and also make sure, going back to what Tati had mentioned, to advocate for yourself, is that sometimes if you find a study that is not in your immediate area, but you really want to participate in the study, it could be possible, if you ask, that they can get you some travel or compensation to get to the study. So just to know, but you can, going back to the search, you can always use the advanced filters, and you can either call clinics. There are usually advertisements for research clinics. Call and ask, and usually they point you in the right direction.
Different types of questions you might have as you're considering clinical trial. So what does informed consent mean? I think we talked through this one a little bit. I got a little bit ahead of myself. But informed consent, as we said, explains the risks, the benefits, and the choices very clearly about whether or not you want to participate in a study and what is going to happen if you do. This allows the patient to decide if they want to join or not, and you shouldn't feel pressured in this scenario. When you're providing informed consent, you should be allowed time to read it. You should be allowed to ask questions, and they should answer those questions to your satisfaction. So those are all things that are expectations, that are standard expectations in research.
What if you change your mind after joining? So you can leave the study at any time. It is always voluntary. And essentially, it's not going to affect your medical care. You can, no one's going to be upset with you. The study doctor just has to make sure that you leave safely. If you're taking a medication, especially for a cancer treatment, they have to make sure that you're safe and that you are going to transition out of it. So please, if you do choose to leave a study, please make that known to the study doctor or the research nurse, and they will make sure that they follow the right path to make sure you exit safely.
Where can I read about risks and benefits? So this is in the informed consent document, my favorite tool of research. All the risks and benefits of participating in the study will be listed in there. The risks will be related to potentially the drug or device, any potential negative reactions that they are aware of. They will make sure are listed inside of that document. And then benefits can be things like things that might be beneficial to you, things that may be beneficial to the population as a whole. Other risks that also are typically included in there are around the risk of the loss of anonymity. Because part of being in a research study is that you get to be anonymous when data is pulled together. They will never call you by name once that data moves to the drug company, the device company, or the FDA even. You will have a number that's assigned to you, and that's so that you can remain anonymous and just have that level of privacy. So one risk that is always there inherently, because they are making you anonymous, is the risk of that anonymity being revealed.
So what if you miss an appointment? Most studies have windows, they have visit dates set based on when you screened, based on when you were randomized into a group. But make sure, and it's usually meant as a safety precaution. So if you know you're going to miss a visit, or if you have something where you can't attend, please make the study staff know. They will usually accommodate you. They usually have windows. So they can bring you in either a few days before, a few days after, but it is just to make sure that you're safe and that they continue to check on you. And, you know, make sure that it's what works best for you.
So what if I get a placebo? So in some studies, people can be randomly assigned to different groups, as we talked about a little bit earlier. One of those groups could potentially be the placebo group. The placebo group is the group that is receiving no active drug or device for their participation. So in studies when there is a placebo group, it is typical that nobody knows who is receiving the placebo drug. When I say nobody, I mean the people who are directly interacting on the study, engaging with the patients, looking at the data. All of those people are what we call blinded. And they are kept blinded, or that information is kept secretive from them for a reason. And then so that there are no influences into the data because people know what's happening. So if you are on a placebo and something were to happen, they would be able to reveal that information. There is usually an entire process for reaching out to the company, and they do know there is a group that specifically assigned to knowing what those assignments are, and they are there to reveal the assignments when it is absolutely necessary. So you don't have to worry about that aspect if you are having some sort of medical emergency and you tell them you're on a study drug. They would be able to, in turn, get to that point of figuring out what that is and be able to know what that is.
So these are a list of questions that you may want to ask before participating. I can also provide this to you at a moment's notice, just reach out. But these are good questions for you to know. Always explain what's going to happen to me, what's the purpose, and all of these are usually outlined in the informed consent. So if they're not, feel free to ask, and they should be able to answer and to your satisfaction.
And even if they are outlined, you feel free to ask. Definitely make them explain it to you.
So this is our wrap up. But what we want is that without joining, we wouldn't have new medications. So we want to make sure that everyone's comfortable with a clinical trial, knowing what it is, knowing what is being asked of them. And in the end, know that you're helping further science, further people that may have the disease that you have, your community, and just think about participating. And obviously, if there's a need for you to do that, please feel free to look and join. And I leave you with the last video. Thank you so much for attending this presentation. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be able to provide information that you may need. Thank you.
Thank you.